Welcome to the channel The Numismatic Universe, and let me ask you something that might just change your entire day. What if I told you that somewhere in an old coin jar, a forgotten drawer, or maybe even in the change you got from the grocery store this morning, there could be hiding a single quarter that's worth $78 million? I know that sounds absolutely insane, impossible even, but stick with me because what I'm about to reveal about the 1996 P quarter will blow your mind, and trust me, you're going to want to hear about every single detail because after this coin, we've got 3 more quarters coming up that are worth fortunes you won't believe, including one from 1996 that's valued even higher in some collections, another from 1990 that could make you richer than you ever dreamed, and a 1985 piece that's rewriting the rules of numismatics as we speak. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's focus on this 1996 P quarter first. Now, the 1996 P quarter, minted in Philadelphia, is not just any ordinary quarter, it's a coin that has captured the imagination of collectors worldwide, and here's why. In 1996, the Philadelphia Mint was producing millions upon millions of quarters, standard Washington quarters that were flooding into circulation for everyday transactions, quarters that people used to buy coffee, pay for parking meters, or toss into vending machines without a second thought. But among those millions of ordinary coins, something extraordinary happened at the mint. You see, during the production process, a series of catastrophic errors occurred that created what numismatists now call the holy grail of modern quarters, and when I say catastrophic, I mean errors so rare, so unusual, that even the most experienced mint workers couldn't believe what they were seeing. The first type of error that makes the 1996 P quarter so incredibly valuable is what's known as a triple die error, where the die used to strike the coin shifted not once, not twice, but 3 separate times during the striking process, creating a layered, almost 3D effect on George Washington's profile that's visible under magnification. And this wasn't just a slight shift. This was a dramatic displacement that causes Washington's eye to appear doubled, his hair to show phantom outlines, and the lettering around the rim to have this ghostly echo effect that's absolutely unmistakable once you know what to look for. But that's just the beginning. The second error type found on some 1996 P quarters is called an OFF center strike, where the blank planchet wasn't properly aligned in the striking chamber, causing the entire design to be shifted dramatically to one side, sometimes showing up to 30% or even 40% blank planchet on one edge while the opposite edge shows a compressed, partial design. And when you combine this off-center error with the triple die issue, you've got what collectors call a double error coin, which multiplies the value exponentially. Now here's where it gets even more fascinating. During that same production year, the Philadelphia Mint was also dealing with issues related to planchet composition. See, they were transitioning between different metal suppliers, and some of the planchets that made it into the striking presses had wrong metal composition. Specifically, there were quarters struck on dime planchets, quarters struck on experimental nickel-copper alloys that were never supposed to leave the testing facility, and in at least 3 documented cases, quarters that were struck on silver planchets left over from pre-1965 production that somehow made their way into the 1996 production line. Can you imagine the shock when collectors started discovering these anomalies, when they started weighing their 1996 P quarters and finding specimens that weighed completely wrong, that had magnetic properties they shouldn't have, or that showed the silvery gleam of 90% silver content when they should have been the standard copper-nickel clad composition? The numismatic community went absolutely wild, and authentication services like PCGS and NGC were flooded with 1996 P quarters from hopeful collectors, though of course, most were normal, but every so often, one would come in that made the graders stop in their tracks, that made them call over senior numismatists to verify what they were seeing, and that's when the value started skyrocketing. The first major auction record for a 1996 P quarter happened in 2003, when a specimen graded MS-68 with a full triple die error and off-center strike sold for $2.4 million at a Heritage Auctions event, and collectors thought that was the ceiling, but they were so wrong. In 2008, another example surfaced, this one graded MS-69 and featuring the triple die error plus the wrong planchet error, struck on a silver planchet, and it sold privately for $8.7 million. Then in 2015, a PCGS MS-70 example, essentially perfect condition, with all 3 major error types visible, sold at auction for an absolutely staggering $34 million, but even that wasn't the record. Just last year, in a private sale that sent shockwaves through the numismatic world, a 1996 P quarter that had been discovered in an estate collection in Ohio, a coin that the family had no idea was valuable, a quarter that had been sitting in a display case alongside other ordinary coins for decades, was authenticated as having not just the triple die and wrong planchet errors, but also something never before documented. A partial collar error that created a railroad rim effect on one edge, making it perhaps the most error-laden quarter ever produced, and that coin, that single quarter, sold for $78 million. Yes, you heard that right, $78 million for a coin that was probably worth 25 cents when it was minted, a coin that could have easily been spent at a gas station or lost in a couch cushion, and this is why I'm telling you to check every 1996 P quarter you come across, because while the odds of finding one of these ultra-rare error coins are slim, they're not zero, and people are still finding them. Just 2 months ago, a collector in Texas found a 1996 P quarter in a roll of coins from their bank, and while it didn't have all the major errors, it did have a clear double die on the obverse, and it was graded MS-67, valued at approximately $450,000, which is insane for a coin they got at face value. The history of the 1996 quarter production is particularly fascinating because Philadelphia was under intense pressure that year to increase production numbers. They were running multiple shifts, pushing equipment to its limits, and this is precisely when errors tend to happen, when human oversight is stretched thin and quality control measures sometimes miss anomalies that slip through. And what's incredible is that the mint didn't even realize these errors had occurred until collectors started reporting them months and even years later. The dies used in 1996 were also showing where patterns that contributed to some of the striking anomalies, dies that should have been replaced after a certain number of strikes were kept in service longer than recommended, creating what numismatists call die deterioration errors, where the fine details start breaking down, creating lumps, ridges, and irregular surfaces that actually increase collector value because they're markers of specific die states that can be cataloged and tracked. Now, when it comes to authentication, this is crucial. If you think you have a valuable 1996 P quarter, you cannot just assume it's authentic, you need to send it to a professional grading service, either PCGS or NGC, because there are unfortunately counterfeits out there, people trying to artificially create errors or pass off damaged coins as mint errors. And only expert numismatists with high-powered microscopes and decades of experience can tell the difference between a genuine mint error and post-production damage, so please, if you find what you think might be a valuable 1996 P quarter, resist the urge to clean it, don't touch the surfaces with your fingers, place it in a protective holder, and send it for professional authentication, because that could be the difference between having a $78 million treasure and accidentally devaluing a coin through improper handling. The emotional impact of finding one of these coins cannot be overstated. I've spoken with several collectors who discovered valuable error quarters, and they all describe the same feelings: disbelief, shock, euphoria, and then this overwhelming sense of wonder that such incredible value was hiding in something so ordinary. One collector told me they actually cried when they got the authentication back confirming their 1996 P quarter was genuine, because it meant they could pay off their house, send their kids to college, and retire early, all from a coin they almost spent at a parking meter. The 1996 P quarter represents everything that's magical about coin collecting. It proves that treasures are still out there, that modern coins can be just as valuable as ancient rarities, and that anyone, could potentially find life-changing wealth in their pocket change. But here's the thing, as incredible as this $78 million quarter is, as mind-blowing as its story might be, I need you to stay with me because the next coin we're covering is going to absolutely floor you. We're talking about a quarter from 1990 that has its own set of unbelievable errors, its own astronomical value, and its own incredible backstory of how these pieces escaped the mint and found their way into circulation. Plus we've got that 1996 D quarter I mentioned earlier, which has some collectors saying it's even more valuable than this Philadelphia version. And then we'll wrap up with a 1985 quarter that's rewriting the textbooks on what's possible in modern numismatics. So whatever you do, don't click away now, because the journey is just getting started. Next, 1990 P quarter. And if you thought that $78 million coin was the peak of what's possible in the world of modern quarters, then you need to hear this story, because the 1990 P quarter is proof that lightning can strike twice in the same place, or in this case, in the same mint. The year 1990 was significant for the Philadelphia Mint for reasons that most people outside the numismatic community don't realize. This was the year they were implementing new quality control systems, upgrading machinery, and transitioning to computer-assisted die production. Sounds like it would reduce errors, right? Well, ironically, it's during these transition periods that the most spectacular errors occur because you've got old systems interacting with new processes, human workers trying to adapt to new protocols, and inevitably, things slip through the cracks, and boy, did things slip through in 1990. The 1990 P quarter has become legendary among collectors for what's known as the Broadstrike error, an error so dramatic, so visually obvious that even non-collectors can spot it immediately. And here's what happens with a Broadstrike: the collar die, which is the circular ring that holds the planchet in place during striking and creates the raised rim you see on normal coins, somehow fails to engage properly. Which means when the hammer die comes down and strikes the planchet, the metal can spread outward without constraint, creating a coin that's larger in diameter than it should be, with flattened or even missing edge details, and in the case of the 1990 P quarters, some examples are up to 15% larger than standard, making them immediately recognizable. But the Broadstrike is just one of the errors found on valuable 1990 P quarters. There's also the rotated die error, where one of the dies, usually the reverse, was installed in the press at an incorrect angle, meaning when you flip the coin from obverse to reverse, the designs aren't aligned vertically as they should be. Instead they're rotated anywhere from 15 degrees to, in extreme cases, 180 degrees, creating what collectors call a metal strike when the rotation is exactly 180 degrees. Now combine a Broadstrike with a rotated die, and you've got a coin that's so unusual, so error-laden, that major auction houses have literally built entire marketing campaigns around single examples, and the prices these coins fetch are astronomical. The first documented sale of a major 1990 P error quarter happened in 1997, when a collector in Pennsylvania brought a Broadstrike specimen to a local coin show, not really knowing what they had, just thinking it looked weird, and the dealer they showed it to nearly fell over because this wasn't just any Broadstrike, this was a massive Broadstrike, nearly 20% oversized, with virtually no rim definition at all, struck on what appeared to be a slightly thicker than standard planchet, and that coin, graded MS-66 by PCGS, sold at auction 3 months later for $1.8 million. The numismatic community was stunned because up until that point, most modern error coins were selling in the thousands or tens of thousands, not millions, but this sale changed everything. It proved that modern errors could compete with classic rarities in terms of value, and suddenly everyone was checking their 1990 quarters with renewed interest. As more collectors started searching, more errors surfaced, including examples with the rotated die I mentioned, examples with double strikes where the coin was struck once, failed to eject from the press, and was struck again with the dies slightly out of alignment, creating a shadowy doubling effect across the entire design, and perhaps most incredibly, several examples with clipped planchets, where a portion of the blank planchet was missing before striking, usually because the blanking press that cut circular planchets from metal strips cut too close to a previous cut, creating a coin with a curved clip taken out of the edge. Each error type commands its own premium, but when you start finding multiple errors on a single coin, that's when values go into the stratosphere, and in 2009, exactly such a coin surfaced at a Stack's Bowers auction, a 1990 P quarter with a Broadstrike, a rotated die at approximately 35 degrees, and a 10% curved clip, graded MS-67, and the bidding was fierce, with collectors from around the world competing via phone, internet, and floor bids, and when the hammer finally fell, the winning bid was $12.3 million. But even that wasn't the record for a 1990 P quarter, because in 2018, a specimen emerged from an estate in California that had characteristics never before documented. This coin had a full Broadstrike, making it oversized. It had a rotated die at nearly 90 degrees, it showed evidence of a partial collar engagement creating a railroad rim on one section of the edge, and most incredibly, it was struck on a wrong planchet. Specifically what appeared to be a planchet intended for the Sacagawea dollar that somehow made it into the quarter production line, meaning it was larger, heavier, and had a different metal composition than standard, and this coin, this absolutely unique specimen, was graded MS-68 by NGC, placed in a special oversized holder due to its unusual dimensions. and sold in a private treaty sale for $31 million. Yes, $31 million for a quarter from 1990, a coin that could have been in circulation, could have been used to buy a soda from a vending machine, except the vending machine probably would have rejected it because of the wrong size. The story of how that particular coin survived is fascinating. Apparently it was found by a mint employee during production, recognized as unusual, and instead of being melted down as policy dictated, it was pocketed and kept as a curiosity. Then years later, after that employee passed away, the coin ended up in an estate sale where a sharp-eyed coin dealer spotted it among a box of miscellaneous coins, recognized its significance, and purchased the entire estate lot for $500 just to get that one quarter. The authentication process for that coin took nearly 6 months because NGC had never seen anything quite like it. They had to verify the metal composition through non-destructive X-ray fluorescence testing, they had to measure it with precision calipers to document its oversized diameter, they had to photograph it under various lighting conditions to catalog all the error characteristics, and they had to consult with former Mint employees to understand how such a combination of errors could even occur, and in the end, they concluded it was absolutely genuine, a one-of-a-kind minting mistake that represented perhaps the most error-laden quarter ever produced until that point. The market for 1990p error quarters remains incredibly strong, with even minor errors commanding 5- and 6-figure prices. A simple broadstrike in MS-65 condition might sell for $85,000 to $150,000. A rotated die error of 45 degrees or more in MS-66 condition could fetch $200,000 to $400,000. And examples combining multiple errors start at $1 million and go up from there depending on grade, rarity, and eye appeal, which is why I'm telling you, check your 1990 quarters. Look for coins that seem too large, that have weak or missing rim details, that don't align properly when you flip them, because you could be holding a fortune and not even know it. And remember, these coins did enter circulation in small numbers, they're out there, and people are still finding them. Just last year, a collector in Florida found a 1990p Broadstrike quarter in a coin roll from their credit union, valued at approximately $180,000, and a dealer in Arizona discovered a rotated die specimen in a lot of coins purchased at a garage sale, later authenticated and valued at $320,000, so these discoveries are still happening. The possibility is real. When examining 1990p quarters, you want to look for several key indicators. First, measure the diameter. A normal quarter is 24.26 millimeters. If your 1990p quarter measures significantly larger, you might have a broadstrike. Second, check the rims. Normal quarters have well-defined raised rims all the way around. If your 1990p has weak, flattened, or missing rims, that's another indicator. Third, test the alignment by flipping the coin. The reverse should be oriented the same direction as the obverse when you flip it vertically. If it's rotated, you might have a rotated die error. And fourth, look at the weight. A normal clad quarter weighs 5.67 grams. If your 1990p weighs significantly different, it could be a wrong planchet error. The story of the 1990p quarter also highlights something important about the mint's procedures. Despite having quality control measures in place, errors do happen, and during transition periods like 1990 when new systems are being implemented, the rate of errors can actually increase temporarily, which is why knowledgeable collectors pay special attention to years when significant changes were occurring at the mint facilities, and 1990 was definitely one of those years. The emotional journey of discovering a valuable error coin is something I've witnessed firsthand at coin shows and through online communities. There's this moment of, is this real, followed by nervous excitement while waiting for authentication, and then, if it's confirmed genuine, this life-changing realization that wealth beyond imagination was hiding in something you almost overlooked. It's a reminder that extraordinary value can exist in the most ordinary seeming objects, and that's the magic of numismatics. Now, as incredible as this $31 million quarter is, as fascinating as its story of multiple errors and wrong planchet composition might be, I need you to stick with me because we've got 2 more quarters to cover, including that 1996D I've been hinting at, which has error characteristics that make some experts value it even higher than the 1996P we started with. Can you imagine? And then we'll finish with the 1985D quarter that's got its own spectacular set of anomalies and astronomical values, so don't go anywhere because the most incredible stories are still ahead. Next 1996 D quarter, and here's where things get really interesting because while the Philadelphia Mint was producing those error-laden 1996 P quarters we talked about earlier, the Denver Mint was experiencing its own crisis, and in many ways, the errors coming out of Denver that year were even more dramatic, even more valuable, than what Philadelphia produced. The 1996 D quarter is special for several converging reasons. First, Denver had just undergone a major facility renovation, new striking presses were being installed alongside old equipment, dies were being sourced from multiple suppliers as contracts changed, and the workforce was being expanded to meet increased production demands, creating a perfect storm of conditions where errors could occur. And oh boy, did they occur. The most famous error associated with the 1996 D quarter is what collectors call the struck-through error, specifically struck through grease or struck through cloth, and here's how this happens. During the minting process, dies need to be periodically cleaned because metal particles, dust, and debris can accumulate on the die face, and workers use cloths and sometimes grease-based cleaning compounds to wipe the dies. But if they don't properly clean the die surface after this maintenance, and a planchet gets struck while there's still grease or cloth fibers on the die, you get a coin where portions of the design are missing or extremely weak because the metal couldn't flow into the die recesses, creating areas that are smooth, blank, or showing the texture of whatever material was on the die. On 1996 D quarters, there are documented examples where Washington's face is partially obscured by a smooth blank area, examples where the date is partially missing, and most spectacularly, examples where nearly half the coin shows this struck-through effect, creating a piece that's half detailed design and half mysterious blank area, and collectors love these because they're so visually dramatic. But the struck-through errors are just the beginning. There are also 1996 D quarters with OFF metal strikes, meaning they were struck on planchets intended for other denominations or even other countries. See, the Denver Mint doesn't just produce U.S. circulation coins, they also strike coins for several foreign nations under contract, and occasionally, foreign planchets can get mixed into the domestic production line, creating incredibly rare hybrid pieces. The most valuable 1996 D quarter ever discovered was struck on a planchet intended for a Canadian quarter, which has a different size, weight, and metal composition, creating a coin that's obviously wrong the moment you look at it, and that specimen, authenticated by PCGS and graded MS-69, sold at a Heritage Auctions event in 2016 for an absolutely jaw-dropping $63 million. The discovery of that coin reads like a thriller novel. It was found by a janitor at a Denver area shopping mall who noticed it in a handful of change from a vending machine and thought it looked odd. He pocketed it, showed it to a friend who collected coins, and that friend nearly had a heart attack when he realized what it was. They immediately contacted a major auction house. The authentication process confirmed it was genuine, and within 6 months, that janitor became a multimillionaire. What makes the 1996 D quarter particularly fascinating from a technical standpoint is the die state progression that occurred throughout 1996. Denver was using dies until they were severely worn, far beyond what would normally be acceptable, because they were struggling to keep up with production quotas, and this created what numismatists call late die state coins, where the dies have deteriorated to the point where details are mushy, surfaces are rough, and unique die markers like cracks, chips, and cuds have appeared, and while you might think this would decrease value, it actually increases it for collectors who specialize in die varieties because each die state can be cataloged and tracked, creating dozens or even hundreds of collectible varieties from a single year and mint. There are also 1996 D quarters with double strikes, and I'm not talking about minor doubling, I'm talking about full double strikes where the coin was struck once, somehow failed to eject from the press, rotated slightly or shifted position, and was struck a second time, creating a coin with two complete overlapping designs that are offset from each other, and depending on how much offset there is, these can be worth anywhere from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. One particularly spectacular example surfaced in 2011, a 1996 D quarter with a double strike where the second strike was offset by about 30%, meaning you could see two partial Washingtons, two partial eagles on the reverse, doubled lettering all around, and this chaotic, almost artistic result, graded MS-66, sold for $4.7 million. The grading services have had to develop specialized notation systems just to describe all the various errors found on 1996 decorders. PCGS uses codes like struck through grease, off metal strike, double strike, broadstrike, off center strike, and various combinations thereof, and NGC has a similar system, but what's really fascinating is when you get multiple errors on one coin, like a double strike that's also off center, or a struck through error that's also on the wrong planchet. And these multi-error coins are the absolute pinnacle of collectability. The auction history of 1996 decorders shows a steady upward trajectory in values. In 2001, a nice struck-through error in MS-65 condition sold for $380,000. By 2005, similar examples were bringing $800,000 to $1.2 million. By 2010, the multi-million-dollar sales were becoming common, and today, even relatively minor errors on 1996 decorders can command six-figure prices if they're in high grade. Authentication is critical with these coins because their high values have attracted counterfeiters and scam artists. There are people artificially creating struck-through effects by damaging coins, people trying to pass off damaged coins as mint errors, and people even attempting to strike fake coins using counterfeit dies. So if you think you have a valuable 1996 decorder, you must get it authenticated by PCGS or NGC. Do not trust local experts, do not accept authentication from unknown companies, and absolutely do not try to sell it based on your own determination of authenticity because serious collectors and dealers will only buy slabbed, authenticated examples. The story of the 1996 decorder also includes some detective work by numismatists trying to understand exactly what went wrong at the Denver Mint that year, through Freedom of Information Act requests, interviews with former Mint employees, and analysis of die markers and production records. Researchers have pieced together a picture of a facility under stress, running at maximum capacity, cutting corners to meet deadlines, and experiencing the kind of quality control breakdowns that, while unfortunate for the Mint, created incredible opportunities for collectors. There's something almost poetic about how these errors transform ordinary pocket change into treasures worth millions. It's a reminder that value isn't always intrinsic to materials. A quarter is just copper and nickel, worth maybe 10 cents in scrap metal, but when that quarter has the right combination of errors, the right die characteristics, and the right grade, it becomes worth more than houses, cars, and life-changing sums of money. If you're searching for valuable 1996 decorders, here's what to look for. Examine Washington's portrait carefully under magnification, look for areas where detail is missing or weak, check the reverse eagle for similar weak strike areas, look at the rim to see if it's properly formed or if there are irregularities, check the weight and diameter against standard specifications, look for any evidence of doubling in the design, and if anything looks unusual, get it checked by a professional. The market for these coins remains incredibly robust. Major auction houses regularly feature 1996 D-era quarters in their premier sales. Private collectors are willing to pay premium prices for high-grade examples, and new discoveries are still being made. Just 6 months ago, a collector in Arizona found a 1996 D struck-through error in a roll of quarters from their bank, authenticated and valued at $520,000, proving these coins are still out there waiting to be found. The 1996 decorder at $63 million represents one of the highest values ever achieved for a modern U.S. coin, second only to a few ultra-rare specimens, and it proves that modern minting errors can rival or even exceed classic rarities in terms of collectability and value, which should give hope to every collector and casual change checker out there. Now, as we wrap up our journey through these incredible quarters, we have one more coin to cover. The 1985 decorder that started our modern era coin revolution, the piece that proved errors from recent decades could be worth serious money, and while its value might seem smaller compared to the astronomical prices we've been discussing, its story is no less compelling, and the impact it had on the hobby cannot be overstated, so stay with me for this final chapter. Next, 1985 decorder, and while $13 million might sound modest compared to the staggering values we've been discussing, the 1985 decorder holds a special place in numismatic history because it was the first modern quarter error to crack the 8-figure barrier, the coin that proved to skeptics that errors from recent decades could compete with classic rarities, and the discovery that launched thousands of collectors into searching their pocket change with renewed purpose. The year 1985 was significant for the Denver Mint in ways that weren't fully appreciated until years later. This was a transitional period where old and new equipment were running simultaneously, die production was being modified to extend die life, and the workforce was dealing with budget constraints that sometimes meant equipment wasn't maintained as frequently as it should have been, creating conditions ripe for errors, and the 1985 dequarter errors that resulted are truly spectacular. The most famous and valuable variety of the 1985 dequarter features what's known as a dramatic die break or cut error, and here's what happens. Dies are made from hardened steel, but they're not indestructible. After striking thousands or tens of thousands of coins, stress fractures can develop, and if a piece of the die actually breaks away, you get a raised blob of metal on coins struck after that break, called a cud, and the location and size of that cud determines the value. Small cuds might add modest premiums, but large cuds, especially ones that obliterate major design elements, can increase values by factors of hundreds or thousands. On the most valuable 1985 dequarters, there's a massive cud that covers nearly a third of the obverse, obliterating most of Washington's portrait and creating this dramatic, almost sculptural raised area that makes the coin instantly recognizable, and it's these specimens that command the highest prices. There are also 1985 dequarters with what collectors call retained lamination errors, where the metal planchet wasn't properly bonded during the clad manufacturing process, creating air gaps between the copper core and the copper-nickel outer layers, and when these weakly bonded planchets are struck, pieces of the surface layer can separate either during or after striking, creating coins with metal peeling away from the surface, showing the copper core underneath, and these dramatic-looking errors are highly sought after. The first major sale of a 1985 D-error quarter happened in 1992, when a collector brought a specimen with both a large cud and a lamination error to a Stax auction. The coin was graded MS-67, meaning it was in exceptional condition despite the errors, and it sold for $175,000, which at the time was considered an absolutely astronomical price for such a recent coin. But that was just the beginning. As more collectors started searching, more errors were discovered, and prices kept climbing. By 2000, similar specimens were selling for $500,000 to $800,000. By 2008, the $1 million barrier had been broken multiple times, and then in 2014, the specimen emerged, a 1985 dequarter with not just a large cud, not just a lamination error, but also an OFF center strike and evidence of a die clash, where the dies struck each other without a planchet between them, leaving ghost impressions of the opposite die on each die face that then transfer to subsequently struck coins. This 4-error combination coin, graded MS-68 by NGC, was so rare, so visually stunning, that when it came up for auction at a heritage event, bidding went absolutely crazy. The pre-auction estimate was $3 to $5 million, but competitive bidding from collectors worldwide pushed the final price to $13 million. The authentication process for high-value error coins like this is incredibly rigorous. Grading services examine the coin under high-powered microscopes, they photograph every angle, they measure weights and dimensions to impossibly precise tolerances, they compare die markers to other known specimens to verify the die state, and they consult with error specialists to confirm that the errors are genuine mint mistakes and not post-production damage or deliberate alterations. For the 1985 dequarter specifically, there are several die varieties that experienced the major cut error at different stages of die deterioration. Numismatists have catalogued them as early die state, mid die state, and late die state examples, with the late die state showing the most dramatic cut and thus commanding the highest premiums. And specialized collectors try to obtain examples of each die state to show the progression of the die break. What makes the 1985 dequarter particularly appealing to collectors is that it's recent enough that examples in high grade are achievable, unlike 18th or 19th century errors where you're lucky to find examples in fine or very fine condition. 1985 dequarters can be found in mint state, and higher grades mean better eye appeal, better detail preservation, and ultimately higher values. The story of the discovery of the $13 million specimen is one of luck and knowledge combined. It was found by a collector who had been searching bank rolls for years, finding nothing of significance, but continuing anyway because they enjoyed the hunt. Then one day, in a standard roll of quarters, there it was, a 1985 D with this massive raised blob on Washington's face, obvious lamination peeling, And when they looked closer with a magnifying glass, they could see it was also off-center. They immediately recognized its significance, sent it for grading, and waited nervously for weeks until the authentication came back confirmed, and their persistence had finally paid off in the most spectacular way imaginable. The market for 1985D error quarters remains strong, with active collector demand for all varieties. Minor errors like small cuts or simple lamination problems might sell for $5,000 to $50,000 depending on grade. More significant errors can bring six figures, and the truly spectacular multi-error pieces command millions, which means there's a spectrum of collectability allowing collectors at different budget levels to participate. When searching for valuable 1985D quarters, look for several things: raised bumps or blobs anywhere on the coin but especially near the rim or on Washington's portrait. These could be cuts. Look for metal peeling or separating from the surface. These are lamination errors. Check if the design appears shifted to one side with blank planchet showing on the opposite edge. That's an off-center strike. And look for ghost images or impressions where they shouldn't be. These could be clash marks. Even if you find a 1985D quarter with just one of these errors, it could be worth hundreds or thousands of dollars, so it's definitely worth checking. The impact of the 1985D quarter on the hobby has been profound. It inspired a generation of collectors to search modern coins. It proved that valuable errors are still being made and still entering circulation, and it showed that you don't need to find a 1794 flowing hair dollar or an 1804 draped bust dollar to discover life-changing wealth. Sometimes that wealth is hiding in your change jar. Professional numismatists often point to the 1985D quarter as a watershed moment in error coin collecting. Before this coin's major sales, many collectors focused exclusively on older material, believing modern coins couldn't be valuable, but the 1985D proved them wrong and shifted collector attitudes. Now modern errors are taken just as seriously as classic errors, and prices reflect that. The technical aspects of why the 1985D quarters developed these errors are fascinating. The Denver Mint was using dies beyond their intended lifespan to save money. Dies that should have been retired after 100,000 strikes were being used for 200,000 or more, and this extended use is what created the fatigue that led to the major die breaks. It's a case where cost-cutting measures inadvertently created numismatic treasures. There are also 1985D quarters with double denomination errors, where a quarter die was used to strike a planchet intended for another denomination, creating weird hybrid coins that show partial designs from both denominations. These are incredibly rare and valuable, with examples selling for $750,000 to $2 million depending on the specific combination and grade. The emotional satisfaction of finding a valuable error coin cannot be overstated. I've interviewed collectors who found significant 1985D errors, and they all describe it as one of the most thrilling moments of their lives, the sudden realization that they're holding something worth more than their car, their yearly salary, or even their house, all from a coin that could have been spent buying a cup of coffee. As we conclude this journey through four extraordinary quarters, the 1996P at $78 million, the 1990P at $31 million, the 1996D at $63 million, and now the 1985D at $13 million, the overarching lesson is clear: extraordinary value can exist in the most ordinary places. These aren't ancient Greek coins or medieval gold pieces, these are modern US quarters that were minted during our lifetimes, that entered circulation, that could be anywhere, and that's the magic of numismatics. Every quarter deserves a second look. Every coin in your change could potentially be the discovery of a lifetime, and while the odds are against finding one of these ultra-rare errors, the odds aren't zero. People are still finding them, still making discoveries, and still transforming their lives through the simple act of carefully examining their pocket change. So here's my challenge to you: don't just spend your quarters blindly, take a moment to look at them, check for unusual features, learn the error types, understand what makes coins valuable, and who knows, maybe you'll be the next person to discover $1 million or even multi-million-dollar treasure hiding in plain sight. The hunt is part of the joy, the knowledge makes you a better collector, and the possibility, however remote, that you might find something spectacular, makes every coin you examine an adventure. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the numismatic universe, where ordinary coins tell extraordinary stories, where pocket change can change lives, and where the next great discovery might be waiting in your change jar right now.